All right, good evening. This is the Gurnee Village Board Committee of the Whole. I'd like to call it to order. Roll call, please, Pat.
Oh,
No.
Donna's here.
Oh, Donna.
Yeah.
Jeez, I'm
We
sorry.
got a clerk this week.
Dang.
Jacob,
Present.
Ross,
Here.
Garner,
Here.
Present.
Hood,
Here.
Here.
all here.
All right, thank you, Donna. It's good to see you. I wasn't expecting you. All right, we have a very important meeting for us tonight. We've invited Daryl to come, and he's the executive director for JAWA. I represent us on the JAWA board, and Jeannie is my alternate, but there's been a lot of discussion lately about capacity and expansion, so I wanted Daryl to go through a very complicated topic that he makes very simple. So,
No pressure there.
yeah, no pressure there. But Pat and I and Jeannie are kind of looking for some consensus so we know going forward how you want us to represent the village. So, Daryl, it's all yours. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Daryl Blennis. I'm the executive director at the Central Lake County Joint Action Water Agency. You do need to find a shorter name for that agency. It's a long one. But wanted to kind of just go over the current expansion that we have. As you may recall, we did a north and west group expansion. And I wanted to kind of just give you up to date and kind of talk about our next steps, things that we're looking at over the next several months. So, Brian, if you would. The north group expansion, this is the one that's pretty close to your neck of the woods here. We finished Grandma Park, and the water delivery was in July of last summer. Lindenhurst was at the end of the year. And Lake Villa and Fox Lake Hills should be done in February of next year. They lagged behind a little bit due to easement acquisition along the pipeline route. Their route is a little bit more complicated and much more urbanized and built up. So it took a little bit of while to get all those easements, but we have them all now and all the bids have been awarded and they should be ready to go by next year. So what's also nice is the North Group is going to be paying in JAWA $35 million in connection fees. So that was sort of their contribution to join this club. They've agreed to that, and we're going to be working on a payment schedule the next few months. Next slide. And then we have the West Group. We just awarded 2 contracts for this project, so we're making some really good progress. We have a few easements remaining. And they will have all the easements ready to go, and we'll award the last 2 contracts. And the 5th contract is the delivery structures, which shouldn't be a problem, because those are on the properties of the Wakanda and Volo sites. But they've agreed to pay in $15 million in connection fees as well to the agency. So that's $50 million in connection fees that we have sort of unofficially earmarked for our capacity improvements that we're going to need ourselves someday. So that money is sort of sitting there, ready to be used for that purpose when we need it. So now that that's kind of underway and we're making really great progress and water is actually flowing in some of these towns, we decided to take a look to see if we could do more capacity or more water sales. So back in 2012, we did a study to determine if we could even do the north and west groups. And we found we had sufficient capacity. And then 4 years later, we sort of took another look at it with updated demand numbers. And we'll go through the charts here, but we think we have more capacity available for more expansion if we want to. So that kind of begs the question, should we do this? You know, can this be done without affecting the charter members that put us at greater risk? And what are other benefits? You know, obviously there's lower rates, maybe even more connection fees from these other towns. But what are the downsides? More wear and tear on the system, that's obvious. This was brought up by a few of the mayors. You know, they're concerned that their vote is watered down for members. And that's a concern. It's legitimate and something we're going to need to address in the next few months. And obviously, unforeseen changes in water consumption. We think we got a handle on this, but you never know. Brian, could you? Next slide. So this is kind of how we determined that we had capacity. So what we did was, let's see here. The blue line is our average day demand. And then we added the north and west groups. You see the uptick here. And then we actually show year-over-year growth, which is conservative. We're actually seeing it flat to declining sales, actually, across the membership. But for this purpose, we wanted to be conservative. So we show year-over-year growth. So what we did was we took the actual demand in the base year, then we applied the CMAP growth curve, which is just under 1% a year in additional sales. So there's year-over-year growth, but we have to be ready to meet your peak demands. So you take the average day, then you add in our peaking factor, which projects out the peak day demands. We may only get there 5-6 days a year, but we have to be able to meet that demand. So our peaking factor is 1.65, which is also conservative. If you actually crunch the numbers, it's actually closer to 1.59. So we have a lot of safeties built in here. So we wanted to make sure that we weren't overselling this. So once you get the demand kind of figured out, you need to know what your capacity is. And that's this red line here. You're only as good as your weakest system or subsystem for us. And for us, that's the pipe leaving the plant. It's a certain diameter. It's 48 inches. And we can't make it 60 overnight, so it's 48 inches. And it has certain capacities that you could do with it. There are some things we can do, but the most we can get out of that pipe is 56. So that's the limiting factor. I could get the plant probably 60, maybe 65 MGD, but it doesn't matter if the pipe can only handle 56. So we stick with the lowest limiting factor in capacity. When I talked with Scott about this capacity, I was explaining all the sort of safeguards that we put in place. For the plant capacity, we actually use what we call firm capacity, which is one pump out of service. So we have a lot of engineering safeguards, safeties in place to make sure we really don't oversell this number, because we can't. We need to be conservative here. Now, when we do our budgets, we are actually much less conservative on how we do the water demand. But here, it's smart to sort of overproject demand in this exercise. And then, to be cautious, the exec committee, and Pat could speak to this, wanted to put another safety on top of it. So we took the 56 MGD and took 4 MGD off for reserve, just in case. So, Brian, go to the next slide. So when you walk that through, so you get the 56 MGD, back out the 4, 52, you factor the charter members, North and West group, add in the peaking factor, subtract this from that, get 7 MGD that we think could be used for additional sales if we're interested. We're not obligated to. It's completely within our discretion. No community can force their way into JAWA. It's completely up to the members on how to proceed. Next slide, Brian. So next steps. We kind of knew that we had some capacity available, so we kind of wanted to kind of get prepared. We were getting a lot of requests, especially after we approved the North and West groups. A lot of towns were calling us, saying, can we get in? Lake Zurich, Antioch, and others. Old Mill Creek. A lot of towns were interested. So we kind of wanted to put a plan together on how we would evaluate future sales. We wanted to be as objective as we could. So we put together some criteria to framework with some weighting factors. It's a really thick, Matt, did you share with them? I know, it's, okay. But it's very detailed. We put together some, I think, very good criteria that sort of mirror the values that Mayor Kovark and others expressed. For example, if a town has water quality issues, they should score high, because that's what we're in the business to help that issue. However, if you're already on Lake Michigan water, you'll rank low, because we don't want you to use this to shop around. We actually want to help people that need help. So we had a series of criteria and weighting factors that we could use to objectively evaluate customers, because there's a realistic chance that we may have more requests than the 7 MGD. So we wanted to kind of have an objective way to say yes or no to people, if we wanted to. That's completed. Mayor Kovark and the board approved that criteria last month, and it's sitting on the shelf. Should we ever decide to use it? So that's kind of the next question. Should we use it, right? So one of the things that some of the members have talked about is their concerns with some of our vulnerabilities. We have a few, mostly in the transmission system. It's a branch system, so if you have a break, everybody downstream, shut off. That was the original design back in the late 80s. I could pull the minutes if you're interested. There was a lot of debate. The engineering firm presented some options for looping the system, but it was very expensive. So the members decided then to maintain their existing supply as a backup plan. And you have wells in your connection with Waukegan. That's your backup plan, and you maintain that system just in case. But that still doesn't address some of our vulnerabilities. I know the mayor of Grays Lake is really concerned. He's further down the chain, down the branch than some of the other communities, about some of our long-term disruptions that we could have. We have a couple of spots that are tricky under I-94, under the Des Plaines, under 41, where if we had a break, it's not days but weeks before we can get it back up and running. So that's a concern, obviously. So they're asking the questions about, well, how can we pay for those improvements? Well, expansions is an option. Connection fees are an option. The other option is to use your money for those improvements. So that's kind of the debate we're having is, should we do these improvements? If so, how to pay for it? So we're going through a process now. This is our phase 2 comp plan. We're going to target the reliability and redundancy improvements in that effort. We're currently evaluating the scope and budget for that effort right now. We anticipate that it'll be ready for the April meeting cycle for Pat and the mayor to review. And we're going to start with those areas where we have the most vulnerabilities on what we could do to fix those and the price tag for those. We're going to look at other interconnections with other Lake Michigan water suppliers like the Northwest Water Commission, North Chicago, maybe others. So backups for ourselves as well. One thing that I'm actually really interested in is the existing pipeline. We're going to do a condition assessment. There's a lot of very interesting technologies out there. You can actually drop in a device called a smart ball into the pipeline while it's active and running, and it'll tell you where your leaks are, where your pipe vulnerabilities are, high tech. So we're looking on ways to do that in our system. So we want to really zero in. We have a large system, so we want to zero in if we do have any weak areas and fix them now, because a small leak usually becomes a bigger leak. So we want to fix them now. So we're going to take a look at that, and it's a complicated process, so we hope to have that ready by next summer. We have a lot of technologies to evaluate to see what works best for our pipe. So that's something that I'm actually really looking forward to. So at the last meeting, the mayors were interested in perhaps having a workshop to discuss this issue a little bit further. Some mayors were concerned or hesitant. I think you've seen their letters. They were in your packets. About taking on any new customers of any fashion for those reasons they outlined in their letters. So we need to have a conversation about this. So the question is, can we do it? And should we do it? I think we can do it. The question of should we do it, that's a policy decision, not a staff decision. So my job is to get the data out there in a format that's easy to digest and let the mayors govern and decide. So one issue that did come up is the notion of a customer versus a member. There is a difference in a couple ways. Members obviously have a vote, but to become a member requires unanimity by all the existing members. So every member has to pass an ordinance allowing that new town as a full voting member. But the contracts that we have with everybody, there is another provision called customer for a fixed term contract, and that only requires a simple majority of the board of directors. So the issue is, should we do it? And if yes, how to do it? Member versus customer. Brian, next slide. So that's kind of in a nutshell. We think we have the capacity. We studied it to death. We have stacks of reports that we could share with you. So I think we can do it. We think we could leverage further expansion to address some of our infrastructure needs with the transmission system. We're using the first expansion to handle the capacity improvements. You can use the next round of expansion to handle redundancies or reliability improvements. Or you can stick with the current plan, and that's to maintain your backup supply. So those are kind of the discussions we're having right now. So, questions? Comments?
So you see why I didn't want to make this decision by myself. I mean, it's a big decision. It's, Jeannie and I have sat through these meetings, so we've had the benefit of living this, but it's still, it's still difficult. I believe the science that we will have the capacity, but again, you're trying to look far out into the future. Although Scott assures me if these projections are wrong and you're into it 5 or 6 years, you can always change your mind. And adjust.
Contract.
Yeah.
You could always stay in the contract and not have to renew it.
I think the most value is this plant is 30 years old, and there's a lot of expensive maintenance that's going to be facing boards, not us so much, but future boards. And the more taxpayers you have on the system, the more that cost is paid for over a large number of people. And that benefits the people in this community who paid to get that plant built, but it'll help. But again, Jeannie and I don't want to make this decision or decide which way Gurnee is leaning without the benefit of all the board members having a chance to weigh in.
Too, Mayor, if I may, you guys are really kind of at the end of the chain, so to speak, because you guys are the furthest from the first. If you look at the pipeline, you're actually closer than like Round Lake Heights, but you're still at the end of a branch. And so, we shut you down maybe once or twice a year to do maintenance. So we can't always keep that main under pressure. We have to shut it down sometimes to perform maintenance. And that means you have to turn on your wells or open up your connection to Waukegan. So that's just something to consider, that as the system ages, the more we can do to reinforce that system, the better off we're going to be.
I mean, can you imagine if you didn't have Jawa for 4 or 5 days or a week or two, which is not impossible? Brett, we can go a day and a half on our water that we have.
Probably stretch it out a little bit farther than that. Once the tower out west gets built, that'll give us additional capacity for storage. Running off our, it also depends whether it's a planned shutdown or an emergency shutdown. And this plan, we can top off our storage to make the most capacity. We obviously run off that as long as possible, not open the interconnect with Waukegan. And then lastly, turn the wells online. Since the wells are different quality of water than what the residents are used to, that would be the last option. Realistically, probably 72 hours, maybe more if we stretch it and implement, water usage restrictions.
One of the things that's required of each member is to put on file with the agency an emergency supply plan. And last year we came up with a template, and each member has been working with us, and Bill's been working with you on that template. And you guys are really good. When you open up the Waukegan connection and have the wells working, you guys could go a while. But the water quality isn't as good. So that's the issue. But in a pinch, your storage, your wells, and the Waukegan connection. So you're actually in better shape than some of the other communities that we serve.
Yeah, but it would hurt. Can you imagine telling a community? I mean, that's, and that's what you're facing if we don't do something now to make sure we have the capital to invest in an aging system. That's, to me, this is what this comes down to. But it's very easy to say, no, we're big enough and no more members, so. Questions? Oh, lots of them. Okay.
A couple times I've heard the term, concern about projections being off, and that's the major issue. What would give you pause to think that your projections would be off?
I really feel really confident. Mike, can you go back to that one slide with the average day demand? Yeah, that one. What you don't see is the dotted lines before this number that are doing this, going down. And that's all the charter members. We're seeing per capita demand dropping. And that's not something unique to us. That's regional and national trends. Washing machines are more efficient. Dishwashers are more efficient. Our towns are more mature. There's less development, so there's less of that new subdivision watering with the landscaping. So we're not seeing that kind of demand we saw in the 90s. We're just not seeing it per capita. I think that's here to stay. What could change is large industry, large user coming in. But that's one of the reasons we have that reserve, the 4MGD. We're showing year-over-year growth, which is contrary to all the trends we're seeing, which is why we did it this way, so that when we said we have water available, we really do. Actually, maybe more than 7. So we may come back to you in 5, 6, 7 years and say it's 9 or 10. But we didn't want to do that. We want to be conservative, at least initially. It's easier to add later than to tell people you need to come off. Right? So we didn't want to have that come up. So that's, I feel pretty confident. We were so conservative, almost too conservative. I mean, I read Scott's memo, and he's right. We were very conservative on showing high demand. But in this scenario, in this kind of planning exercise, that's exactly what you want to do here. So I feel pretty confident. Plus, with the 4MGD reserve on top of it, I feel pretty comfortable.
Thank you.
Carrie?
Another question regards to your demand model. How do we factor in businesses that have not come to Gurnee? We'd like them to come to Gurnee, and they have excessive water use for the production of their business.
I think one thing is that, for me, it's going to, because your non-residential use is declining, so that makes it the difference. Which still, I think, so instead of having a declining, it's probably going to be more flat, making up the difference that you're losing in other areas.
So are they, I'm sorry.
Let me ask Dave, don't, when you're working on something coming in, you factor in sewage and water, right? Usage?
Yes, yeah, that's always something that we look at. You know, the users that we have in town currently are, would be blips on the radar. I think I read something about Foxconn moving up to Racine. Something on that scale. I think they were looking at 6 to 7 GD just for their manufacturing facility, just to give you an idea as to what kind of scale you would have to have in order to be a blip on this radar.
For perspective, this 4MGD reserve is a Gurnee and a half as far as size. I kind of like it's 8 Lake Bluffs. Kind of put it in perspective, just what the reserve is. It doesn't even factor in, what I think is sort of this fluff and this average day number. Because I think if I were to budget, my budget number would be flat. That's my budget number. But for this exercise, I want it to be high. So if you did get more business users that were water, focused or more water heavy, I think they would just sort of work into the gap between what's real versus what's projected. So I think it's safe, in my opinion.
I have a tag on this one. Do the members get to decide what to charge these high-use businesses, or does is that at an agency level?
We charge the village a rate, and your retail rate to businesses and customers are up to you.
So I guess a little bit of a concern there is technology, Mini Foxconn comes to Gurnee and we charge them the same amount as we would charge a non-type of high water user. So we get that discretion, as it sounds like the other members do. So we might have Mini Foxconns coming and we're all just charging them the same rate as a non-high water user business.
It's up to each member what they charge. We all the members pay the same amount for water. That's set by the governing board at JAWA, and that's based on cost of the water, cost to treat it, cost to distribute it, maintenance, reserves,
bonds.
all the same stuff. And then we get that, and then Patrick and Brian factor that number in, and then we add cost to operate our system and some reserves, and then we vote as a board on that water rate. Didn't we talk once about charging businesses something different than residential, I thought, when we did the water study?
Based upon your meter size, you have different
Charges.
fixed costs plus different variable costs built into our
Okay.
rate system.
So there is some accommodation for a more intense user as a bigger meter.
Yeah, that wouldn't be uncommon, from my experience when I was in retail sales, to have, especially if you have a large user coming in, you can actually negotiate rates too, as part of development approvals. So it's things you can do. So.
And we have 2 big water users between Six Flags and hopefully
Great Wolf.
Wolf. And
Yeah.
actually, did you see a difference, a little drop this past year without key lime?
Yeah, not huge, but we could tell the days they fill up. You guys' demands go up. We can tell. So.
They recycle a lot of their water too. Yeah.
Yeah, but there's still a lot of evaporation.
Yeah, that's. All right, Cheryl?
So the users that just came in, are they members now? Did we vote that they're members?
Yeah, the way that worked is after the first construction contract or contracts with a value of $5 million or more was approved, they become voting members.
Okay.
So they're all voting members now. The North and West Group members are.
So how many members are there?
13.
Okay.
There's the Round Lake Consortium, counts as 1 member, but 2 tiny communities. Round Lake Park and Round Lake Heights.
So I always say 14, but it's 13.
Technically it's 13. Yeah.
Technically.
The meeting room has kind of gotten a little tight. As they've added members. The room didn't expand, but
It's a bigger table now.
It's a bigger table, but the same size room.
yeah. Can I-
Go ahead.
Do we have, if the plant is now 30 years old, do you have more land available to expand to?
We wouldn't need more land to get the plant above this 56 MGD. We don't need any more land. In fact, there's an opportunity to get the current filters that we have re-rated at a higher flow rate. So there's a chance that I could go from 50 to 60 without making any improvements, which we're going to start there first. And then if not, we'll add a 10 MGD membrane skid out back. We don't need more land for that. So
Yeah.
we've already done the studies on how to get an extra 10 MGD out of the plant, and we have a lot of options. We don't need any more land.
And I had somebody ask me this, and if I knew it, I couldn't answer it. Is there a limit to how much Lake Michigan water that we can take in?
Yes, every community has a permit with the state. It's called your Lake Michigan allocation. And each member operates, I don't oversee that. Each member has their own permit. And that is regulated by IDNR. And that's sort of your ceiling. And that gets reevaluated every 5 years, I believe. And historically, they keep increasing your allocation to match what you need. So now that you have an allocation, yeah, they're going to give you what you need, most likely. As long as there's a water left in the process, and there is, I think we're safe. If I were a town in the southwest part of Chicago that wanted Lake Michigan water, I'd be worried. But you already have it, you're fine.
And just as I see Old Mill Creek wanting to come in, there is a lot of land in Old Mill Creek that could be developed. And
Yes,
if
a lot is
they-
also in the forest preserve now, but they sold a lot of it off. But you are correct. One of the things that we negotiated with the North and West Group is we actually put a hard cap on them. So unlike the charter members, I have to meet your total water demand, whatever it is. With the new North and West Group members, we actually wrote in a hard cap. And we would do that going forward with anybody else as well. Because our job is to protect the charter members. That's what we wanted to do. So.
Sorry.
Greg?
I understand that we have extra capacity that we could sell. My question would be, why do you think we should sell it?
Well, there's some benefits, and there's pros and cons to every decision. The pros and cons are mostly financial. More sales, we're able to lower the rate per gallon for maintenance and the bonds. So we're able to lower rates with more sales. We negotiated with the other expansion connection fees, and I imagine we would do something similar. So we get a large influx of cash that we could use for any purpose. We've earmarked that money for capital improvements, and we could do that again here if we did another round of expansion. The downside risks are more wear and tear on the system, obviously. We're pumping more water, which means we're at the pipes under more pressure, more use, pumps are running harder, running longer. So that's the downside. And then there should be some crazy change in the demand that we can't foresee that could cause a problem. I don't believe it will, but I can't say never on that. If all the members all of a sudden we're adding industry left and right, crazy expansion beyond their current projections for land use, yeah, then these numbers would change. But that's why I feel pretty confident that the 4-MGD reserve is this nice self-imposed buffer. It's really going to help us there. So that's the pros and cons. Pros is we get lower rates, more cash for capital improvements, and the cons are more wear and tear on the system, which may exacerbate some of these issues with our transmission system, these vulnerabilities that we have. But if we did add expansion, we could use that capital improvements to fix those vulnerabilities. So that's the pros and cons.
So is this proposal reversible at some point? Should we want to find it's not working the way?
Well, if they're members, that's kind of a forever obligation. If you vote somebody as a member, that's kind of a forever obligation. If you did a contract customer, it's for a term. And if they agree to the terms, there's an end date with renewable options that are options, not requirements. So in a sense, if you did a contract customer route, you could have a way out.
So can you do a complete customer contract route versus a combination? How does that work?
Well, we have 7 MGD that we could sell. You could do 7 1-MGD contracts, or one customer, 2 MGD, one member. So you could do it a bunch of different ways.
So if they're members, we can't reverse it.
I think that's a forever obligation, pretty much. Yeah. So that's why we want to make sure we got this right.
It's like Gurnee couldn't be kicked out of Jawa.
Right.
The other mayors
Right.
wanted to kick us out. They can't.
But my point is, in the future,
Like if
there was a huge influx of businesses or build-outs in other communities, and all of a sudden, it's this projection is not working, then we're in a situation where...
Correct. Which is why you could do a 20-year contract with the community with 2 or 3 5-year extensions. And that way the first contract matches the initial bonds that are issued. And then if these numbers change in a bad way, you don't extend the contract. So that is an option.
So percentage-wise, what would be the potential savings per gallon of water?
If you maximize those full 7 MGD, between 10 and 15%, just on the rate alone, day one. And you probably get another $50 million in connection fees if you did this similar formula that you did with the North and West groups. So you get, I'll say 12% saving on the rates day one, maybe more. I'm also conservative there. You probably get more. And then you'll get the influx of connection fees, which will be used for capital improvements most likely, which actually does lower your rates, because otherwise you would use rates to pay for your capital improvements.
So 20 years down the road, when all of this bigger system needs, infrastructure repair, is the money there?
Well, the good thing is we already budget. We already have a rate in our current budget for CIP. We have an O&M rate for maintenance. So we do a good job now planning for the existing infrastructure that needs to be replaced. So your projections that I give Pat every year, that's already covered. So adding in the new members really is sort of icing on the cake.
Would lower that.
Would lower that.
Sure.
So connection fees. Is that just paying for the privilege of joining the group, or is that actually paying for connecting it? I mean, like, is the community...
Well, they owe it when they connect, because they haven't been paying in for 30 years to all the infrastructure you've been paying for. So that's the rationale. Most towns charge connection fees to new customers when they come in. We don't charge the existing members connection fees when they add new units, but we should charge new members coming in connection fees, because it's not fair that they take advantage of all the infrastructure that you've been paying for 30 years, day one. That's the rationale.
So their actual, when they actually do connect, they pay for that in addition? Or?
Yeah, that's how they pay is up to them. Some of them are going to use property taxes, some are using water rates, but what they owe is a contractual obligation to the agency. Combined, they owe us $50 million. So that is an obligation that the North and West Group members have. How they're going to pay that, we're going to work out a schedule that works best for us. One of the options in our agreements is that we work out a payment schedule, and we're doing that. So, but it is a contractual obligation that they can't skirt around.
Which is negotiated, and then those agreements, once they're voted on by the JAWA board, then comes to our board, and we have to pass an ordinance accepting it. So you would see those details.
Yeah, the emissions agreements for the North and West Groups, you adopted it by ordinance with all those terms and conditions. And it's actually
Probably
still...
don't remember reading it.
I do remember, but what my confusion was, to me, when you say connection fees, I'm thinking of the actual physical going out and connecting it. And you're talking about a fee to become a member, or to become a customer.
We just called it a connection. You can call it whatever you want, but essentially it's...
That's cities connecting to JAWA.
Yeah.
That's the
Okay.
connection fee.
Yeah. So
In fact,
it's
well,
not
for the West Group, we
physical.
called it a capital contribution fee. So we called it for the West Group, because they actually had some language in one of their contracts with the community outside the jurisdiction that they had to serve. So we called it something, the connection fee. So,
Okay.
but I imagine, that's a lot of money, but it was still cheaper to pay us than it was to build their own JAWA system, because they were looking to do that. They were looking, the Northwest Groups were going to build another water plant or expand an existing plant, build a pipeline, and we were still the cheaper option even with that requirement. And we probably would be for other communities as well.
Yeah, can you imagine having to put a pipe 200 feet out in Lake Michigan and then pump it all the way to the plant in your city? And that's... Karen?
Mayor, I believe, Wepler from Libertyville, talked about some health concerns a couple of times in the memo. Is there some unforeseen health concerns to our water that you could expound on?
He was probably referring to unforeseen changes in regulations, perhaps. But Lake Michigan is a pristine source of drinking water. We have an advanced treatment process, one of the most advanced processes in the country. Our drinking water is in the top 1% for water quality, not just in the United States, but in the world. So water quality is not the issue.
Can I add on to that one?
Yeah. Oh, go right ahead.
You, as part of your plan, do you have provisions for any chemical hazard disasters, warfare, somebody put something into the water stream?
Yeah, we have scenarios that we actually rehearse and practice all the time. The good thing about Lake Michigan is it's a really huge water source, so it takes a tremendous amount of pollutant to affect that source. And we have a very advanced treatment process with ozone and UV, and actually with GAC, which actually does a good job of removing a lot of those issues. We actually had an issue a few months back in North Chicago. There was a spill in North Chicago into the lake. We actually handled it very well with our treatment process. Lake Michigan did most of the work for us because it dilutes it. And then our advanced process did its trick and took a lot of it out. So
Terry's talking about considering as a customer a community that needs water as a result of a health issue. So
Okay.
the radon, the lead.
Well, as part of our evaluation criteria, that was actually a factor that we weighted very heavily. So if a town has an issue, but they still can't force their way into our agency, even if they were under some sort of court decree or by the state, they can't force their way into Jawa. Now, the state could pass a law that says you must let them in, but otherwise, they can't force their way into Jawa. But our criteria that we established on evaluating customers, that was one of our top priorities, was if a town had water quality issues, they moved up the list. Because that's what we want to do. We want to help towns out with bad water.
Their wells could be becoming contaminated, and now they have to find another source of water. And you don't really have any other choice but a well if you're not in Jawa right now.
So towns that were in that scenario would score high in our evaluation. But our attorney, Stewart, keeps reminding the board that no community can force their way in if they had a water quality issue or any other issue. They just can't say, we're in. It just doesn't work that way.
Keep going.
Last one, I swear.
No.
No, that's all right.
So it sounds like we're talking about is, I would like to see what I would be thinking like a pro forma that would say, if we allow a member, we're going to get X million dollars that directly attacks the 15 to 30 million that we need for infrastructure improvements. So like that lump sum versus if we do contracts, I'm sure there's no, requirement to pay 5 million. It's the blip, the little drip of money going
Yeah,
forward.
in that report, the 250-page report, we actually have a financial section where we talk about the financial benefits of bringing in the 7 million gallons. We speak to rates, we speak to connection fees, and we based it on the formulas that we use for the North and West groups, and we based it on volumes and our impacts to the rates. So there is a section in that report that speaks to that, the financial benefits, very detailed section on what the charter members get out of future expansion. Now, we don't go to the next step about how do we solve these other capital improvement issues, because that's part of phase 2. But we do know that we're going to be bringing in a lot of connection fees if we did another round of expansion that could be earmarked for those type of improvements.
I'll get that report out to the board.
Yeah, it's unfortunately it is very technical, but there is a nice financial section in there.
Yeah.
Hopefully someone will summarize it.
There is an executive summary,
There's a
but
summary.
we do our best.
But I can see the benefit both ways, but I also think we have to be prudent about not giving it all up. And so that's why I was thinking about, do we need another member at 5 million, one more, two more, versus one at 5 million and a contract, that gives us the slow drip.
Yeah, one of the things too, when we did our evaluation criteria, we actually, the larger the community was, the better they scored, because we'd rather have one 5 million gallon customer versus 5 1 million gallon customers. So the larger you were initially, plus the larger you were day one versus your long range capacity. So if you were already built out, you scored higher too. But you're actually right. You could do that you could tell, the board could tell me to go out and negotiate 7 $1 million contracts, and I'll find a way to make it happen. So, but you're right. There's a lot of ways you could do it, or you could just increase the reserve from 4 to 6, and reduce the 7 to 5 that you could sell, just in case you wanted to be sure that you had even more cushion available. So there's a lot of ways, If you felt you needed additional reassurances, you could do the contract route, increase the reserve. So there's ways you could do that. Great thing is we have a lot of options. So
Yeah, when you read papers from all over the United States, there are hundreds of water systems that have not been maintained. No one has taken the time to do these exercises, and now the whole systems are collapsing. And
Yeah,
Flint is a perfect example of somebody's system didn't work well, and they tried to switch to another one and took a little shortcut there in the middle.
well, there's stories right now that in Cape Town, South Africa, they're actually going to run out of water in a few months.
So
The entire city runs out of water.
It probably seems like, wow, why are we talking about 2050? But we have an obligation now to do what we can to make sure that 2050 the system has been maintained and operates and has sufficient water. And but I can tell you, there's a lot of communities that do not put this effort into it.
Yeah, every year, Pat, we work with Pat and the exec committee. We put together a budget. We actually have a 20-year capital plan tied to the rate. So we actually show you what the rate would be to fund that 20-year plan. So, we have the plans in place to maintain our infrastructure, the existing infrastructure. To make it more robust and add in redundancies is something that's outside the scope of that area. But that's a question, that will come up, and we'll find an answer.
You did a great job. I go through it every month, but to hear it like fresh was kind of nice. So
No, this is great. I appreciate the opportunity. These are complicated issues. There are stacks of engineering studies, so we don't want to make it too confusing for you, but we tried our best to make those manageable and readable. So
Attend a meeting.
oh yeah, you can always join us.
we serve dinner.
There's always food. It's a good meeting because they always have food before the meeting. So
It helps with the quorum aspect too. So
So Pat will send you the very detailed report, and then over the next week, if you could give him your thoughts, and then we'll put together Gurnee's opinion.
position paper or whatever.
Position paper, which you guys will see before we submit it, but we'll do a position paper based on the feedback we get after you have a chance to read that. And I very much appreciate you giving up a night to be
No
here.
problem. And if you need me for more nights, just let me know. This is what I do. So
You're doing a great
we're
job.
talking about water.
We like our water.
I'm the water guy, so just let me know.
All right, that was the only discussion item we had for tonight.
Yeah,
So-
just a reminder, 5 o'clock Monday.
Oh, that's right,
Start the
budget.
budget workshop.
So you have two big documents to read over the next week. You've got the Java report and your budget book. All right, do I have a motion to adjourn?
Second.
Motion by trustee Ballmer, second by trustee Garner. All in favor, say aye. Aye. All right, thank you.